Okay, give me one more second. I think we got it going. All right. Got that. Okay, let's go back to sharing our screen. Hopefully everyone can see this. All right, and I'm going to start this from the beginning. Okay, let's plug this back in. Okay, for some reason. All right, I hope everyone can hear me. Okay, we're ready to begin a new course. Thank you everyone for joining. We're actually waiting for you, David and Debbie, so now we can start. All right, make yourselves comfortable. We'll be here for, God willing, the next 5 weeks. This is originally a 6-week course, but we're going to condense it a little bit into 5 weeks. We taught this course back in 2015, and it was one of the first courses that I taught. And you'll tell me if anyone moves over there, if they have their hands raised, because...
Can you speak up, Rabbi?
What?
Can you speak up, please?
I don't know what to tell you. It's on the loudest that I could get. Okay. Well, yeah. The only thing I can say is pick up the volume. Does everyone else say you're able to hear me? Is everyone able to hear me on Zoom?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you okay.
Loud and clear, Rabbi.
Loud and clear.
I can barely hear you. I hear everyone else loud and clear. All the other students I hear very loud. I can barely hear you, Rabbi.
Okay. I hear you fine. Yes, I can hear you. I don't know what to say. Everyone else is saying that they could hear me, so I'm not sure what to say. I'll just try my best. Okay. What were we saying? So when we originally taught this course, and I taught it twice at that time, once in Ocala, we were then in Ocala at the time, and then another time in the villages. It was one of the most largely attended courses that we had, and it was also one of the first. People very much enjoyed it. After that, I had put, anyone ever heard of Master the Possibilities at Top of the World?
Mm-hmm.
So I taught it at Master the Possibilities. And they give you a list of everyone that's attending your lesson before. And I look at the lesson, and clearly it was mostly a group of people that were not Jewish. And I wasn't really anticipating that, because the way it was advertised was Rabbi Yossi Hef with my name. And then it was advertised as a Jewish perspective, on happiness and whatever the blurb said. And I went in and I taught the first class, and some people were fascinated. Some people really enjoyed it. And some people were like, hey, I didn't know that you're going to be teaching Jewish stuff. Well, it was on the blurb, it said there was a Jewish perspective. So why do I say this? Because obviously there are many perspectives on this, and many people have different ways that they go about it. There's many books, there's many self-help books, and so on and so forth. But this is going to be a Jewish perspective. We're going to take it from Jewish sources, mostly, not only from Jewish sources, but mostly from Jewish sources, and to see how we can incorporate it. And of course, happiness is something that we have to work on. That just happens overnight. It's something that we have to participate. We have to do our part to make it happen. And there are difficulties. There's challenges in our lives, and we're going to talk about those. So we're mainly going to focus on 5 different points, which is going to be in the 5 different lessons. The first lesson, which is today's lesson, will be about happiness, which what we call the joy of the being you. And this is probably the most basic and important part of it, and that is understanding oneself will help will help gain a perspective in how we should go on to appreciate the things that we have in life and to be happier for ourselves. In other words, sometimes it's just a matter of changing our own personal perspective, how we see ourselves. That in its own right, in its own sense, could already change everything. Lesson 2, we're going to talk about what we call the joy of purpose, facing stress, patience, mindfulness, hope. These are all things that we face every day. I know, especially here in the villages. Sometimes I feel that way when I'm Lesson 3, we're going to talk about the joy of having, which is the art of gratitude, being thankful, something that our generation very much is missing. In the 4th lesson, we're going to talk about the joy of struggle, understanding that there are going to be shortcomings and how do we deal with that. And lesson 5 is going to be coping with the pain of loss. So let's take a look to begin with. For many years, the most popular undergraduate class at Harvard University was Intro to Economics. And that's what students mostly like to take. Then there was a Jewish Israeli professor by the name of Tal Ben Shachar. He was an Israeli-born psychologist, and he put out a course that he called Positive Psychology. Right? You heard of that? And it was the most attended course at JLI at Harvard, with over 800 students at the time. Now I'm sure there's many more since. And since I'm sure thousands of students have gone through. But it was a new concept at the time, for someone to say that our discussion here, we're not going to teach you how to be successful. We're going to teach you how to be positive, how to be happy. So let's begin with learning exercise 1. How are happy people different from unhappy people? To what degree do our circumstances, let's see if this thing changes. Yeah,
Can you hear?
actually working.
But it's okay.
Let me do one more thing. To what degree do our circumstances, family, education, career, overall impact our overall happiness? What are some of the challenges to living a life of happiness? And what are some of the benefits of living happily? Anybody have any thoughts on that? I'm sure you do.
Yes.
You can share something.
No, please,
Wait, yeah,
please don't.
hold on. I wouldn't want to say.
Differ from unhappy people. My
Yes, I have a comment to make. It says mute.
No, it crosses off mute. No, you should press.
Right. Right. Very good.
Rabbi, I have a comment.
Yes. Yes, Al.
Years ago, Vivian had an operation that eliminated her pain, straightened her spine, and she grew 2 3/4 inches on the operating table. She became a happy person, a new Vivian, and it
Okay, so you're saying that a circumstance actually did change it.
Yes,
changed her dramatically in a 10-day period.
Mhm.
And she became the happy person that she is today, that we know, our Vivian.
Okay. All right. Well, there you go. So you do have sometimes that circumstance could change. So, by the way, Bonnie has studied this extensively. So it's always good to hear different perspectives as well. So let's take a look at a few things. Let's see if we can get this to work. Okay. Oh, it's going backwards. Wow. Okay, we're getting this to work. All right. We're getting happier. Okay. So how are happy people different from unhappy people? To what degree do our circumstances impact our overall happiness? What are some of the challenges of being happy, and what are some of the benefits of living happily? So this is what we're going to talk about today. Put this up a little bit. Too much. Hired as our tech guy. Easier to teach classes that way. Okay, so let's take a look at a short video to begin. Yeah.
Is the light switch, that one on the wall there, these lights?
No, they're up in front.
Whoops.
A little more contrast would be better. See the screen.
Okay. Now I'm not getting any volume. Oh, hold on. Share sound. Okay, we're not hearing the sound. Oh my God.
Go back to share sound because I don't know if it caught it. When you see.
It says share sound. Are the people online hearing it? They're probably hearing it and we're not now. That's probably the problem. The volume is on the top. Are you online able to hear the video?
No.
No, okay. All right.
No.
Oh my God. Okay, let's stop this. We'll skip the video then. Sorry. I may be able to show it on somewhere else.
Oh, no, he's coming.
Calling Ron to act, since he's watching it, I'm calling to see if
Oh.
he had any thoughts for you on how to do it.
Well, I mean, no, the problem is that,
I know you maybe share sound both places.
yeah, well, I mean, they're not hearing it either, so,
They're both bad.
okay. Is he much better with tech stuff? Yeah, okay. I mean, we did this last time and it's on and off. Sometimes it works, sometimes not. Okay. Well, maybe we'll show the video soon. Anyway, let's continue on. So let's first discuss, why does happiness produce so many positive benefits in our lives?
Put this away.
No, I'm going to take notes.
Yeah, but it aims at my eye.
So we're going to begin with some things that show us possible benefits of happiness. We're going to begin with one of the central Jewish teachings, which is called the Book of Tanya. And the Book of Tanya is the first Hasidic book, and it is taught by the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, who was the first Chabad Rebbe. And he writes as follows in chapter 26, text number 1. Those of you who have the book, hopefully you'll be able to follow along in the book or in the copies. Again, I put it in the chat for those of you who are watching online. I put it in the chat so you'll be able to look at the chat over there. This should be made known as a cardinal principle.
You want to push it?
No.
The internal spiritual battle waged against one's negative impulses is similar to a physical wrestling match. If two individuals are wrestling with each other, each striving to fell the other, but one is lazy and lethargic, he will fall and be easily defeated, even if he is stronger than his opponent. The same applies regarding the conquest of one's impulses. It is impossible to defeat them by a state of laziness and heaviness, which stem from sadness and a dull heart, but only from a state of brisk enthusiasm, which derives from the happiness and the heart free of any trace of worry and sadness in the world. So if you have two cars, you have one car that is a Ferrari, and you have another car that is an old, beaten Honda from 1992. Which is going to go faster? And the answer is it depends, right? If the Ferrari has no gas in it, it's going to lose the race. So you could be the strongest person, but if you're lazy or heaviness, then that's not going to help. So if we want to be successful, we want to stay on our diets, right? Right after New Year, we want to control our impulses. We have to control our minds, our negative thinking. So what is the first thing is it depends on our spirit. If we master happiness, then we already have a decisive edge. Why does it provide this advantage? So Chassidus explains, because it's more than just that we feel better about ourselves, but actually there is more of an expression of oneself when one is in a good mood. How do we know this? Well, people that tend to be more shy or quiet, how are they in a time of happiness or joy? By, say, a child's wedding or a very happy occasion, things change. And all people are like that. Whenever you're an expression of joy, clapping, dancing, you're much more expressive. You're bringing out much more. So joy opens up the valve of our potential. It allows us to be more expressive of who we are. That's why historically, when they used to go to battle, they would march. They would always go marching to battle, right? Why do they make the soldiers march? Because when you're in good spirits, you have a better chance of winning. And this might explain why happy people are so much more successful in many areas of life. Things that are required for good marriage, for good health, for holding a job, for solving many other things, there's a better chance that they would probably be more hired for certain jobs, because it unleashes the inner powers, drives our strength to flow outward. It unlocks the power of self-mastery, and self-mastery, I can't read that because it's being blocked. Okay, it's okay. Anyway, so self-mastery leads to successful in many critical areas in life, in marriage, in work, and so on and so forth. So let's take a look of how this is even more. Not only does it affect us, but one of the great Hasidic sages, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, he actually says something very, very incredible. And he says, not only do we affect ourselves when we are in a happier mode, but we actually have an effect on God himself. Let's take a look at text number 2 from Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev in his book Kedushas Levi. He writes, the Baal Shem Tov would constantly declare, it is written, God is your shadow. Just as the shadow mimics what a person does, so too God, so to speak, mimics what a person does. And continues on a statement from the Zohar. Anybody ever heard of the Zohar, which is one of the most famous Kabbalistic works, one of the first Kabbalistic works? Come and observe, says the Zohar. Our world is always ready to receive the spiritual flow that emanates from above. The upper world perceives in accordance with the state below. If the state below is joyous, then correspondingly abundance flows from above. But if the state below is one of sadness, then correspondingly the flow of blessing is constricted. Therefore, serve God with joy, because human joy draws a corresponding supernal joy. Isn't that incredible? We actually have the ability to affect what happens in the higher realms, what happens in God's realms. And if we serve God with joy, he says, then there will be joy above. And of course, we want that there should be joy above. You don't want to have the things that happen in this world in a sad way. You want them to be in a happy way. So we want to have that expression to affect the way it is in above as well. And so our world receives everything from God, but it also clarifies that we could trigger the way God is going to affect the world. So if we trigger God in a positive way, in a happy way, then that will in turn affect the way God comes down to the world as well. Yes. Absolutely, 100%. 100%. And that's why we said you'll have a better marriage, have a better job, you'll have more friends. These are all examples of how it affects people around you as well. Okay. Man is created, and why is this so? Man is created in the image of God. It doesn't mean that God is the same physical form as people, but it means that we have the character traits and certain sense of what God has to offer. And so therefore, we are able to bring down those expressions the same way God does.
Can we make this bigger?
No, we're in the full screen.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see if that will work.
There are settings.
Let's read text 3b from Rabbi Shlomo Majeski, who is a more modern Hasidic scholar. He's actually a relative of Chani's. When a person is happy, he stands above all his weaknesses. Usually we actually give for people in the crowd to read, but being that I am afraid that people may not be able to hear on Zoom, that's why I'm doing the readings. But until this year, that's the way we always did it. We would have people in the crowd to read. Also, you could probably read better than I can, but that's... When a person is happy, he stands above all his personal limitations and weaknesses. He can do things that ordinarily could not do. He can forgive his worst enemy. His joys generate inner energy that breaks through and shatters any barriers that stands in his way. When a person creates joy in the spiritual realm, the same thing happens. In the spiritual realm, there are also limitations and barriers, for God has chosen to establish a natural order through which he controls our world. Just as there are rules of nature that govern the physical world around us, there are principles of causality that govern the effects produced by our conduct. On a most general level, these rules follow the following principle. When a person does good, he receives benefits. If he fails to do good, he will suffer difficulties that make it obvious to him that he should change his ways. There are patterns of causation that God chose to establish in the spiritual realm. Nevertheless, when a person is besimcha, joyous, he creates joy in the spiritual realm. God himself is, so to speak, also besimcha. This causes God to reveal a transcendent dimension that is bound by the laws of causation mentioned above. In simple terms, this means that God will give great blessings and make positive things happen, even though normally these blessings would not be granted. By radiating simcha, we can awaken simcha above and affect radical change before us. So what he's saying is something incredible. He's saying not only is it about the way we feel, but it's also going to affect what happens in our lives physically. The story that's told, the Alter Rebbe, who we quoted from his book before, the Tanya, he was passing his grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, who was praying. And after he finished his prayers, the grandfather called him over. And he said, I noticed that your prayers were rather somber. And he says, how do you know? He says, well, I heard you praying with a nigun, with a song. You were humming a song that was, not such a more somber type of song. He says, I want you to always pray with a very joyous song, because that will actually affect your prayers, and it will affect the way God answers your prayers as well. That's what he was telling him. That's not only about the way we feel, but it's also the way it's affected by us. Let me do this. So it's written there. Okay. All right. So when we are happy, we create joy within the divine realm. And this causes God to reveal a dimension of blessings that transcends all limitations. Next.
What does that mean?
This causes God. This? If God forbid someone is ill, okay, and the doctors say that so and so is the diagnosis. You pray to God. Praying to God in a way of joy will break the boundaries of what the diagnosis is. I have a friend who was a very close friend, and they found a tumor in his brain, God forbid, and the diagnosis was really not great. And the night before he was going to go into surgery, his father made a big celebration, and he had people come in, and it was a celebration thanking God for the miracle. This was before the boy went into surgery. And sure enough, thank God the boy came out today. He's a father, the family. And, the father said, I'm already going to celebrate because the joy is going to break all the boundaries. And he really meant it, and he really believed it. And that affected how things happen. Now, I can't, I'm not God. I can't tell you what's meant to be and so on and so forth, but this clearly has that effect.
So does praying.
100%. But we're saying pray with joy, not with sadness. That's what we're saying. That's why you find many times if you walk into Hasidic synagogues, you'll find that the prayers are more with smells. Yes.
It's a little different from praying, because typically with praying, you're asking for something, or you're praying for a particular outcome, whereas the alternative is to behave as though the outcome has already occurred, and you're being grateful for positive outcomes.
Right. Well, we're not comparing prayer versus joy. We're saying that even the prayer itself should be with joy. Right. That's what we're saying. Text 4, joy is loftier than tears. The heavenly gates remain open for the tears, the Talmud says. The gates of tears are not locked. Joy, however, demolishes and pulverizes the supernal walls and barriers. So joy could get you through the gates, but joy removes all the boundaries to begin with. And so we see this is what this comes from originally. The Zohar is the one that tells us this, that what we do, the way we are joyous in this world, the way we have a good spirit, that is the way God responds and as positive energy. Absolutely. Okay, let's take a little exercise. Learning exercise 2, it's in your book. You don't have to answer this to me, answer it to yourself. In each of the following statements and questions, circle the point and scale that you feel is most appropriate in describing you. In general, I consider myself, number 1, not a very happy person. 7, a very happy person. Okay, like I said, you don't have to answer it. Answer it to yourself. I suggest you write it down, and it may help you as we go through this process. Next question is, compared with my peers, I consider myself less happy, more happy. Again, 1 being the least, 7 being the most. Number 3, some are generally very happy. They enjoy life regardless of what's going on, getting the most out of everything. To what extent does this characterization describe you? From 1 to 7, not at all or very much. Is everyone with me on Zoom? You can hear me? Fine, so it's either yes or no. Some people are generally not very happy, although they are not depressed. They never
Yes.
seem as happy as they might be. To what extent does this characterization describe you? Not at all, or a great deal. Looks like we have some comments here. Let me see. We got some chat. Please explain. Please mute. Your whisperings are coming through to others, okay? Please, everyone, mute yourselves. Okay, sorry. Let me see. I think everyone's muted now. Is everyone good here?
No, don't keep answering.
All right. Looks like everyone's still on. Oh, wow, we have a lot of people on. I didn't even
Yes,
realize-
Yes,
on.
we're here.
Okay, very good. All right, so let's go. Let's go back to the continuation. We're on student page 18. What is the now when we talk about the importance of happiness, let's see how do we get there. The teacher asked the students, Johnny, who were the two kings that brought the most happiness to their people? Johnny answered, drinking and smoking. So, the word happiness, do a little etymology. We'll go back to school, okay? All right, we have some teachers here. The word happiness, etymology comes from somewhere. Let's take a look at some words that share the word of happiness. What are they? Happen, happenstance, haphazard, hapless, hap. What do these all have in common? What does basically the word hap mean? Hap means luck, something that just takes place, something that occurs to you. Randomness, it's happening to you. Not something that you essentially are doing, but something that is taking place in your life. That's essentially what the word hap means. And happiness means being happy from what happens to you in life. That is the definition, according to the etymologic definition of what happiness is based on what happens. But nevertheless, the circumstance, mazel, exactly. But the circumstance of one life as the defining factor of happiness is actually contrary to Jewish thinking, as you pointed out before. For most people think that if I'm going to be blessed with that lottery that someone just won yesterday for $1 billion, how much was it? Over $1 billion, then life would have been much better. Everybody ever heard of Viktor Frankl? Right? So he's one of the fathers of psychology. Oh, I didn't put these on the board. All right, happenstance, a chance of happening, haphazard, characterized by randomness, hapless, unlucky, and hap, luck. Okay, so these are all expressions of things that happened to you, So it's a result of having things, good health, intelligence, attractive looks, a good education, having money, etc., etc. And most people think that if I were only have so-and-so, then I would be good. Like Joanne Rivers says, people say that money is not the key to happiness, but I always figured if you have enough money, you can have a key made. But may or may not be true. Well, let's see. Money can't buy happiness, Sim, so instead of a raise, I'm giving you a bottle of Prozac. Okay. So we mentioned Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl, who was the father of modern psychology to a certain extent. And he was a Jew who went through the Holocaust. And he had a book that he wrote. We're not going to go into the whole Viktor Frankl. It's a story of its own. It's a very, very interesting story. But he says that there was a young woman in the concentration camp who knew that she would die in the next few days, or was at least expecting it. And he talked to her, and she was cheerful despite of this knowledge. And he said, "How are you so happy?" She said, "I'm very grateful that fate has hit me so hard." She said, "In my former life, I was spoiled and did not take my spiritual accomplishments seriously. But now I'm able to appreciate every moment that I have in my life." A modern study bears this as well. It's in text number 5. I don't know if we're going to go through the study. Let's skip the study. But you know what? Let's read it. It's short. One of the first empirical studies to provide a glimpse into problems of fluent youth was a comparative investigation into low-income urban 10th graders and their upper socioeconomic status, as they call SES, suburban counterparts. The sample included 264 suburban students who were mostly from Caucasian white-collar families and 224 inner-city youth who were predominantly minority as low SES. Affluent youth reported significantly higher levels of anxiety across several domains with greater depression. They also reported significantly higher substance use than inner-city students, consistently indicating more frequent use of cigarettes, alcohol, marijuana, and other illicit drugs. So it clearly has nothing to do with what they have, because they have everything. And this was done in 2003. Unfortunately, in 2021, the amount of suicides just from affluent, very well-to-do kids, high school kids, is staggering, which you don't see by a lot of the less fortunate families, if you will. So there's a very interesting point here. If you take a look at the Hebrew etymology, we talked about the English etymology of happiness. Now let's take a look at the Hebrew etymology. In Hebrew, how do you say happiness? Everyone knows? Simcha, right? Simcha, joy. The word bisimcha, okay, letter by letter, makes up the same letters as the word machshava, which means thought. Bisimcha, joy, the same letters as the word machshava, thought. Joy and thought come together, right? So a thought has an effect on our processes of attitudes. If we say, I will be happier if, and I cannot be happier if, then we'll never be happy. But if we change our thought process, then everything will automatically change. So our mind is the most crucial key to being happy. And Baruch Hashem, it's also something, thank God, it's something that we could also have an effect on. We could change the way we think. And that's what these lessons are for. Yeah.
This parallels Eastern thought in slightly different language, which basically says that you're using happiness and joy almost interchangeably, even though we said that happiness is more a reflection of circumstance. Eastern thought is that happiness is derived from circumstance, environment, things outside of us, whereas joy is from within.
Okay.
Straight.
All right.
There's a slight difference between joy and happiness.
Fine. That's
It's the same thing.
right. Well, thank you for the comment. I didn't study Eastern religion, so I can't comment. I don't know. But yes, I mean, there's a bit of a difference between joy and happiness. But that's why I want to look at the Hebrew word, because the Hebrew word is the way to go as far as our discussion here. So let's begin by, today is about, to begin with, how we perceive ourselves. And the most important question we have to see is how we understand ourselves to be who we are, and through that, we could appreciate, be more happy with ourselves. So there's essentially two extremes, as you see in exercise 3. You have one individual who will say, when it comes to self-esteem or arrogant, as being the two opposites, one being very low self-esteem, the other one being very arrogant. One says, I deserve a lot of admiration. One says, I don't deserve admiration. Where would you think the happy individual is situated? The one who needs admiration and attention, or the one who doesn't? Now, let's look at it in the other way. Someone who has low self-esteem, are they going to be happy? Probably not. Someone who is very arrogant, are they going to be happy? Probably not. Well, let's take a look at these two extremes and see. Rabbi Avram Tversky, you ever heard of him? He's one of the big names in modern Jewish psychology. He's written many books. We have some of his books on the shelf right behind me. He says as follows: a trait often present in people with negative self-images is that they try to please everyone. People who fear that they are unlikable are apt to try to buy friendship, as it were, by ingratiating themselves to others. If asked to do something, they'll invariably comply, because although they wish to say no, they're afraid that refusing someone's request may cost them that person's affection or friendship. As a result, these people often carry a great deal of resentment within themselves and are angry that others are taking advantage of them. Those people pleasers are unquestionably unhappy people. So that is type A, not type A, but the type A in our discussion. Okay, so those are people who are always trying to please others. What also happens with such people? Stresses of everyday life are virtually unavoidable, whether they are job or business worries, family problems, or social stresses. People who feel themselves as to be competent are generally able to cope with these stresses and make the proper adjustments, often bringing the problems to satisfactory resolutions. People who consider themselves inadequate see normal stress situations as being overwhelming, not because the challenges are actually so enormous, but because they feel too inadequate to cope with them. And finally, text 7c, people who have negative self-images are extraordinarily sensitive. Their egos are so fragile, and they so anticipate that their imagery defects will be noticed that they may develop a type of paranoia, interpreting even benign remarks as insults and grossly exaggerating any remarks or actions which may be remotely critical of them. And this was written in 1991, 2021. Wow, is this much more relevant with the cancel culture that's going on around us, right? I mean, if you say one thing and someone gets insulted, it's over. So people who have a lower self-esteem, obviously, or people who don't feel good about themselves, obviously, are always going to have trouble in this area. But what about the arrogant person? What about someone who feels very good about themselves? Someone who feels very up about themselves, very positive. Well, let's take a look at what the Medrash is a commentary on the Torah, written roughly at the same time that the Mishnah was written, around the time of the destruction of the temple, which is shortly after the Common Era began, about 2,000 years ago. So they said to the Euphrates, "Why is your sound not audible?" "My deeds make me known," it replied. When a person plants a plant next to me, it matures in 30 days. When a person sows a vegetable next to me, it sprouts in 3 days. They said to the tigress, "Why is your sound audible?" "If only my voice would be heard so that it may be noticed," it answered. And this is something that's very, very powerful. We always tend to think that the loudest ones in the room are the ones who have it all. But that's not necessarily the case. So according to this, many times they have the least. The ones that are more comfortable with themselves don't have that much to try and get others' attention for. If you don't have within yourself, always trying to get everyone else's attention. If you find it necessary to ponder your importance and to share with others, and your deep-seated feelings always have to be expressed, and everyone has to always know what you're thinking and what's going on by you, well, maybe there is not much going on. And so we see that that's also not good. Of course, having very low self-esteem is not good, but holding very high self within oneself is also problematic. Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the previous Chabad Rebbe, whose yahrzeit we commemorated yesterday, the 10th of Shvat, he said, "There is more happiness upon receiving a gift than receiving a wage. One does not work for a gift and does not deserve it, so one can be happy upon receiving the gift. But a person works for a wage and deserves it, so there's less reason for joy upon receiving it. A person who is overly self-aware, who mistakenly believes himself to be high-standing, who therefore thinks that he deserves everything that he has, this person will have no happiness in all that he has." So if we feel deserving of everything, and we will never be appreciative of things. And this lesson is not on being thankful, which we're good. Gratitude is a different lesson, but this is more about just the personal understanding of it. So we have a negative self-concept, which is people who are people pleaser, feels inadequate, stressful situations become overwhelming, extraordinary, sensitive, fragile ego. But then you also have the arrogant person. Might be expression of low self-esteem, unhappy with what they have, often experiences unmet expectations because you always think that you deserve more. What happens in our generation? It's called the I generation. The iPhone, the iPad. It's the I generation. If we think we're so great, we might be setting ourselves up for a lot of unhappiness. And that is why the Talmud tells us, and that ma'od ma'od havish shafal ruach. Be very, very humble, says twice. Ma'od ma'od means very, very humble. In text number 10. Ma'od, double humble. Why does it say twice? Why is it telling us to be double humble? So the classic commentaries in the Mishnah say that the Jewish ethics require that we avoid all extreme characters. And when it comes to most things, we have to be very careful to not go to any extreme. You have to have a proper balance. Even kindness has to have a proper balance. Even liking, squandering, discipline, all these things are important if used in the right way. They have to have a proper balance. But when it comes to humility, it says go the other extreme. Ma'od ma'od, be very, very humble. Humility has to be that extreme. So this seems to be a little bit counterintuitive to what we said before, because we would assume that someone that is a negative self-image will not be as happy. If you're always thinking low of yourself, shval ruach, you're always thinking humbly about yourself, wouldn't that have a negative effect? Seemingly, it would seem so. Let's just check in with our Zoom friends. We got a chat here. Could you repeat the comments when they are made? Okay. All right, let's see. Everyone's good here. Looks like everyone's still on. Most people are still on. Yeah, you had a question?
Yeah,
No question.
Here we are.
Well, one second. We have a question first in the room.
be very, very humble. Does be humble necessarily have to mean be self-deprecating or humble? I wouldn't think it does.
Okay, very good. So that's why we're going to describe, and that's the next part. We're going to explain what is the proper definition of humility. Exactly. Who there? Al, you said you had a question?
No, there was no question. She was just saying.
Oh.
yes, we're here.
Okay, good. All right, let's put this back up. Okay. So let's take a look at a very interesting Talmudic discussion that has to do with a bride. One of the mitzvahs in the Torah is to dance by a wedding. It's actually a mitzvah to dance, not only to enjoy the wedding, but it's a mitzvah to dance by the wedding. The Talmud in Ketubah says like this: Ketzad meraktim lifnei hakala. How do you dance before the bride? If anybody's ever been to a Jewish wedding, you know it's a big thing to dance before the bride. A lot of times, you know, they'll get up and they'll do all kinds of dances and things, and they'll make flips and they'll juggle fire, whatever it is, depending on the wedding. So the school of Shammai says, each bride as she is. In other words, the bride endowed, avoiding anything untrue or exaggerated. But the school of Hillel says, refer to every bride as a beautiful and graceful bride. Sages of the school of Shammai said to the sages of Hillel, if she were lame or blind, do you say to her, a beautiful, graceful bride? Does not the Torah state, distance yourself from falsehood? Very interesting, right? And so one of the explanations is that if you're saying this is a beautiful bride, even if you don't think she's a beautiful bride, but to the groom, she's a beautiful bride. So the way you think of it doesn't necessarily mean the way they see it. It's all about their perspective. And to the groom, this is a beautiful bride. I'm sorry? 100%. Oh, she said, okay. Yes, thank you for reminding me. She said maybe they're talking about beauty from within. And that's true as well. And that's one of the explanations given. But one of the things we're saying is that, you know, it's all a matter of how you see it. Just because I or someone else doesn't see that person as beautiful doesn't mean that she's not. It's all in the eyes of the beholder. And why is this important? Because it means in the eyes of the beholder. What does humility mean? Humility means that we understand truly who we are and what we could become. Let's take a look at the Lubavitcher Rebbe, text number 12. There's a well-known teaching of the Rebbes of Chabad. Just as we need to know the defects, so too we need to know our strengths. The anomaly of this phrase that is that it says our strengths, but with regard to the defects, it merely says the defects, not our defects. What is the reason to it? And that's based on the translation of Hebrew. When a soul sins, the Zohar says, and discusses the procession of rectification, the Zohar, however, phrases, this is a question of bewilderment. The Leviticus says, when a soul sins, then you shall bring so-and-so as a sacrifice. The Zohar says, a soul sinned? Can a soul sin? Is it possible? Meaning the concept of sin is completely alien to our being. Even when we stumble, God forbid, does not undermine who we are. Rather, it's something outside of our nature that has latched onto us. We are citizens of the material mundane world, and it's therefore possible for something unholy to attach itself to us. Though it's a defect, it is our defect, but a defect is, in a sense, it is not our defect, but a defect imposed by our environment. So, what is the Zohar telling us? That even when a person sins, even when they have negative traits, it's not something that's inherently theirs. Reaction to the environment, or right, or something else that's affecting them. She said it's a reaction to the environment. And that's why the Baal Shem Tov says excessive humility will distance a person from serving God. Why? Our perceived lowliness will lead us to disbelieve that our prayer and Torah study stimulate a flow of divine affluence to all the supernal worlds and that the angels are nourished by our Torah study and prayer. If we are truly believe this, how incredibly great would the joy and reverence that accompany our service. We should be mindful that we are a ladder that our head reaches the heavens, and all gestures, engagement, words, and movements have an effect on high. So what is he saying? If a person is excessive humility, then you won't believe that you actually have a power. You won't believe that you actually have ability. So now we're sort of in a roller coaster here. The Talmud says, or the Mishnah says, you have to be very, very humble. And now we read from the Baal Shem Tov that he says, wait, don't be so humble, because then you won't be able to be yourself the way you have to. Or as we see in the previous text, that you can't really do anything bad. So what's going on over here? So understanding what true humility is will give us a definition and understanding of the proper way to see ourselves. Let's take a look at text 50. Rabbi Yitzchak explains this very, very well. Humility is not, humility is not synonymous with inferiority. It is not due to lack of inner good or to being on a bad path, heaven forbid. We should contemplate how all the good we possess is an inheritance from our ancestors. We should not take credit for our belief in God or for our willingness to give up our lives for our faith, because these are natural inborn traits we inherited from our ancestors Abraham, ... This is the idea of humility. We do not take credit for the good we possess, knowing that our attainments are not our own doing, but something we received by inheritance. This is the meaning of the verse. Moses was exceedingly humble, more than any other person on the face of the earth. Moses was cognizant of his own qualities and was aware that his lofty spiritual level was unparalleled, but he was still humble. He recognized him from above. He felt that if another person would be endowed with the same abilities and qualities as he, the other would have equaled his achievements or perhaps even surpassed them. It was this that led Moses to be the most humblest man of all. Moses, the greatest person who ever lived. No one denies that. Even other religions don't deny that. But he was the most humble. How could you say the greatest man that ever lived is the most humble man that ever lived? And so he says, because what is humility? Humility doesn't mean I believe that I'm nothing. Doesn't mean knocking, I'm nothing, I'm nothing, I'm nothing, I'm nothing. That's not humility. Humility means I am something, but they're not my own talents. They're my God-given talents. God gave me a gift. God endowed me, imbued me with generations of greatness that we have. If someone would have what I have, I'm sure they would have done better. But I know I could always do better. And I'm sure that if someone else had these talents, then they would be better. And maybe even surpass them. And this is what Moses was humble. It wasn't that he didn't recognize who he was. He said, I only am who I am because this is what God made me. And God made me the leader of the people. If someone else had those, I'm sure they would do a better job than me. So both are true. Humility, it taps into truth. It works with the truth. It doesn't divide between what we feel and how we speak. It doesn't stem from our shortcomings. People think humility is, I think low of myself. But that's not what humility is. Humility does not negate truth, and humility does not stem from our shortcomings. That's not what the definition of humility is. Humility means I know who I am. I recognize who I am. I know I have accomplishments. I know I've done great things, but I cannot take credit for it because I'm just using the gifts that God gave me to do what I can. If God gave someone else these gifts, I'm sure they would have done a greater job. I'm doing the best I can, but I'm using the gifts and talents that God gave me. This is what humility is. Humility is not lying to yourself. Humility is working with the truth within yourself. There that you can do if you want on your own. In the left column, list 3 personal accomplishments which you are proud of. In the right column, list entities outside of yourself that provided you with these talents, circumstances, or abilities to achieve these accomplishments. What time is it? We have a broken clock. I'm not sure. All right. I was going to have some of you share that, but I just don't think we have time right now. So recognize that our accomplishments are due to things outside of ourselves. Someone else was granted these qualities, might have developed them to be better. And now we have a better tools to work with for joy-causing self-concept, which is the first part of this course. Being truly joyous, on one hand, we're very comfortable with who we are. We know that we have intrinsic value. We know that we're worthy. We don't think that we're nothing, because that's not what humility means. We know we have capabilities. And we know that we're able to avoid unhappiness by negating a negative image of ourselves. If we had a proper image of ourselves, we could build tremendous joy from the self-knowledge. But at the same time, the world doesn't owe me anything. I'm not deserving of anything special. I have these gifts. I'm not ignoring them, but I'm simply paying back what my job is. I'm created by God. I was imbued with these talents. God is giving me a job to use them properly. I'm his worker. So know your intrinsic worth. Know your vast capabilities. Be humble as you see that these things in life are gifts. So where does happiness lie? If you're going back to the exercise that we had, is it closer to the one who says, I deserve a lot of admiration, or closer to the one who says, I don't deserve a lot of admiration? And the answer is neither, right? But it's more than in the middle. It's both. It's taking both extremes are wrong, but having both extremes as well. Having both extremes and not having both extremes. Having both extremes in the sense that I do have something. I'm not going to lie to myself about it. I know what I have. I know my abilities, my capabilities, my talents. But at the same time, to tell myself that whatever I have are only gifts from God. And he imbued me with the ability to use his mission by doing that. So we admire ourselves for who we are and what we can do, but at the same time, we don't deserve the admiration. We don't expect anything for what we do and for what we did. And that's why humility is not an impediment to happiness, but on the contrary, being properly humble, if you have the proper definition of humility, humble doesn't mean you have a low self-esteem. Humble means you have a high self-esteem, but you're humble about it. Both are important, both extremes. Okay. A very interesting point, a deeper understanding. We can take this a step deeper. This is what we're going to call the flow humility. Text 16a. When someone senses his head or one thinks of his limbs, it indicates illness. A healthy person does not feel his limbs. The same applies to the spiritual sense. When a person senses his own existence, and this is the definition of arrogance, this indicates a spiritual illness. A spiritually healthy person does not sense himself, right? Think about that. What it means that a person does not sense his own existence despite all of his good. He does not think of himself as an object of significance. He does not claim credit or think that he has something special standing. The humble person is completely unabsorbed in himself. So now this is a deeper concept. This is not what we said until now. This is a deeper sense of it. What are we saying now? This is a radical idea. We're saying a person who is healthy spiritually and emotionally and intellectually does not focus on themselves. You're focusing constantly on accomplishing what has to get accomplished, moving forward in life, doing things. The Talmud tells us Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, one of the greatest sages that ever lived, and they asked him on his deathbed, where are you going? Are you going to go, to heaven or to the opposite? He says, I don't know. They said, what do you mean you don't know? You don't know? What do you mean you don't know? He says, I don't know which way they're taking me. And he meant it. Why did he mean it? Because to him, it was never a focus. It was never an issue. Where am I going to go in the next world? I have my job in this world, and that's all I'm focusing on. Right? It's like these guys. Right? What is this famous picture? That's actually not an original. I think that's from a movie. But anyway. Storming the beaches of Normandy. You think any of them stopped for a second to think, let me think about how great I am? None of them said, let me think about my importance that I'm going to make in history. They were charged with a mission, and they went and they stormed the beach. It wasn't that they weren't making an impact on history. They were. Every one of them were affecting history forever. But that's just not what they thought about. It wasn't something that they stopped to think about. Going back to the analogy of if you get a cut in your finger and suddenly you start realizing you got a finger. If there's no cut in the finger, you don't think that you have a finger or not. The fingers are just doing what they got to do. I got a cut, by the way, a couple days ago. So the same thing is here. With us, a healthy person, if a person is constantly thinking, am I good? Am I not? What am I? Where am I? What am I? That in itself is the problem to begin with. The question itself is the problem. Because someone that's not focused on themselves shouldn't think about themselves. A person that's focused on what they got to do or what has to happen is not focused on themselves. There's actually a concept in modern psychology similar to this way, and it's called the flow. You ever heard this term, flow psychology? Yeah. Okay, you heard the term flow psychology? Okay, so we'll read through it quickly. Just I keep looking at the clock there and realizing that it doesn't work, so I have to look at my phone. Yeah.
There's something that bothers me about all of this. You know, whatever we are given, it's our inheritance. We actually didn't do it.
No, I didn't say you didn't do the good deed.
No, it's,
So your talents and abilities to do it are
you
gifts.
have to be given some credit for using that which you've been given too. Otherwise, where does your self-esteem come from?
Again, that's the point is not to say I'm nothing. The point is saying I understand and I appreciate what I have done, but I recognize that it's not because of myself. It's not that I imbued it within myself. I'm simply using the gifts that God gave to me. We're not saying that you shouldn't reckon. That's the whole point. We're not saying don't recognize the good things that you do. Recognize it. But also, on the other hand, see that these are gifts that God gave you and you're using those gifts and talents for that. If you have someone, let's say, that's incredibly musically gifted, right? And they say, I'm going to use my talents, my gifts to just bring so much happiness to the world. And they go and they go play at weddings and play at whatever, bar mitzvahs. So does that person say, look how amazing I am. I am the one that's bringing joy to so many people. Or does a person say, thank God I have the talent that I am able to bring joy to people. Not look at me, I'm so great that I'm bringing joy to people. Or is it saying, thank God I have this talent that I'm able to use to bring joy to people. And if someone else had the talent, maybe they would have done a better job than me. Right? So it's not recognizing what you do. You are recognizing it. But you also recognize it that you're simply using the gifts that were given to you. That's what humility is. Was it more clear now? Okay. So let's deal with this flow concept. This is from a professor. Pronounce the name Mihai Chink Sen Mihai. That's how you pronounce it. Mihai is the first name. Chik Sent Mihai. I don't know where it comes from, but that's the name you pronounce. That's how you pronounce it. Okay, so anyway, she said, I think it's a woman. Gender neutral. Okay. When an activity is thoroughly engrossing, there is not enough attention left over to allow a person to consider either the past or the future or any other temporary irrelevant stimuli. One item that disappears from awareness deserves special attention because in normal life we spend so much time thinking about it, our own self. In flow, there is no room for self-scrutiny. When a climber is making a difficult ascent, he is totally taken up in the mountaineering role. He is 100% climber, or he would not survive. There's no way of anything or anybody to bring self. The absence of self from consciousness does not mean that a person in flow has given up control of his psychic energy or that she is unaware of what happens in her body or her mind. In fact, the opposite is usually true. A violinist must be extremely aware of every moment of her fingers as well as the sound entering her ears and the total form of piece she is playing. Less of self-consciousness does not involve a loss of self and certainly not a loss of consciousness, but rather only a loss of consciousness of the self. What slips below the threshold of awareness is the concept of self, the information we use to represent to ourselves who we are, and being able to forget temporarily who we are seems to be very enjoyable. Okay, so here's an example of the mountain climber. Let's see, are there any chats there? Someone has their Okay. So,
So basically, when you have the ability and you're right in the middle of doing something, the activity and everything that you're capable of doing is just coming through you, and you're not focused on what you're doing and how you're doing it. You're focused more on what the task. You're
Right.
just doing it.
right, exactly. In other words, what we're trying to bring out over here is there's one question of, am I or am I not? And then there's another way to view it, that the question of am I or am I not is irrelevant. It's not a question to begin with, because I recognize that I have everything, but that's not what the focus is. I'm simply using myself to work through what's happening. And the moment I start focusing on am I or am I not, then right away I lose focus of where I have to go, like the rock climber. 1 second, let's just take a look here. Ultimate humility lacks the consciousness of the self due to being engrossed in his or her own mission, and the arrogant let's see, you can see that. Okay, what's the opposite? You have the arrogant person, or a person with low self-esteem, but ultimate humility lacks consciousness of the self completely, because all you're focused on, what is my mission in life? You wake up every day, you say, what is expected of me today? What do I have to do? What has to get done? Not who am I to do that, but what has to get done. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, should it become like a second nature to us, that we just automatically do this? You don't even give it thought, and you know it's supposed to be done, like you said, and you just go and do it.
Okay, so repeat the question. The question was, shouldn't it be a second nature to us that you do it automatically? And the answer is yes, but naturally it may not be that way. For many people, it doesn't just happen. And it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of study, and it takes a lot of, self-refinement to become that. And happening. God gave us the Torah, and that's why God gave us these teachings, the Hasidic teachings, that help us focus more on our mission and purpose in life rather than focusing on who we are. And just think if students in public school, in high school, were taught a little bit more this way, how maybe they would be a little bit happier if they were focused more on their mission in life. Yeah.
I do feel that it was a lot easier being younger, feeling a mission in life, getting married, having kids. As you get older, the mission in life is a little different.
Okay.
And a little harder to think about sometimes.
Okay. Well, let me just repeat your comment since they want to know. She said getting older could be a little bit more difficult to find your mission in life. That may or may not be true. Depends on the individual. And sometimes maybe, you have to have a little bit of self-introspection. Doesn't mean not to think about yourself, but at moments, at times, before one goes to bed, when you say the Shema prayer at night, to have a little bit of introspection, what happened in the day, where do I want to be headed? But the point over here is that we're not focusing on yes, self or not self, but focusing on the flow. You wanted to point out one more thing?
I was just gonna say, because when you said when you're getting older, the Lord is giving
I have a comment on that.
most of this will come from home.
Okay, let me just read the last text, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Yeah, somebody said something on Zoom.
Okay, I'll take his question in a minute. Al, I'll take your question in a minute. Let me first finish text 18.
Okay.
So the truth that is the idea of flow, meaning is this concept, forgetting about oneself, does that bring to happiness? And the answer is affirmative. Having more focus on our purpose and mission and what we got to do brings more human happiness. The same is about humility. We know that humbleness is not something that's associated with forgetting, denying oneself. Unhappiness could come from arrogance as well, and also from lack of self-esteem could also be. But having true humility is meant in the proper way that we as a Jewish people, or for all people, to properly see ourselves. So what is the path to true happiness? God created man as a purposeful being. Man's purpose is to accomplish and throw himself into things beyond himself. Such a person is in tune with life and is truly happy. Text 18. There are multiple ways that kindness can make us happier. Surveys of volunteers, for example, show that volunteering is associated with diminished depressive symptoms and enhanced feelings of happiness, self-worthy mastery, and personal control. A helper's high. Consider an unusual study that follows 5 women volunteers over a 3-year period. These 5 women, all of whom had multiple sclerosis, MS, were chosen to act as peer supporters for 67 other MS patients. They were trained in active and compassionate listening techniques and instructed to call 15 minutes a month, once a month. The results show that over the 3 years, the peer supporters experienced increased satisfactory, self-efficiency, and feelings of mastery. They reported engaging in more social activities and enduring less depression. Okay, so it's a very interesting study done by this Ellen Langer. She said, many people worry whether there is life after death. Just think about it. If we gave up self-evaluation, we could have more life before death. I'm going to see if the video works. I don't think it does. So, the videos have not been working, but we could send them in the email, at the post-class email. So here's a good exercise to think about. Perform 5 acts of kindness. The acts do not need to be for the same person, and the same person may or may not be aware of the act, and see if that brings more happiness. In other words, when we're not focused on self, we're focusing on what we could accomplish as individuals. Now, for those of you who have the book, we mentioned Viktor Frankl. There's a long article from him, very suggested to read. The whole story of Viktor Frankl is fascinating. Anyway, it's for another time. Al, did you have a question?
I have a comment. I agree very
Okay.
much with what you said a couple moments ago. As you get older, you can become more focused on your mission and be able to accomplish more because of your age, as long as you have good health.
Okay, so Jackie, he's answering your question. He says that as you become older, you could accomplish more if you have age and good health. What if not good health? We just gave an example of the MS patients, of what they could accomplish even without good health physically. Okay, lesson 2 is going to be next week. The joy of purpose, facing stress with patience, mindfulness, and hope. Stress is something that many people have been going through lately. It could be an impediment to happiness. So how do we rise ourselves above everyday worries and frustrations and dealing with this joy? Those of you who did not get a book, well, God willing, we'll have it for you by next week.
Can I just say something sort of on what Jackie was talking about? There were expectations about what we were going to do. You said marriage, go to college, do this, do that, do